Hi, it's Dr. Ariel Schwartz. I'm here to bring you a shorter practice today that I'm going to call from the ground up. And it's really going to be a rooting practice. It's going to start close to your mat with opportunities to kind of lift up and energize. And you'll see where you want to take this. As with every yoga practice, this is an invitation to listen to your body, to follow what feels organic and right for you. There's always this dance of finding your edge, backing away from it, leaning in, and your body's going to give you feedback about what is the right practice for you today. I'll be your guide. I'm going to go on my mat. I invite you to join me. It's helpful to have blocks for this practice. And because we might be playing a little bit with kicking up, if you want to have a wall in front of you, if you're going to move your way towards a handstand, just have that so that you're not going to necessarily go over the top. Okay. So playful flow, and we'll jump in together. For this particular flow, I'm going to invite you to start sitting with your toes tucked under, and we're going to start in a toes pose. So a little bit of an opening for the fascia of your feet. And as we connect into this shape, rather than kind of leaning right into your heels, I'm actually going to invite you to lean forward, turning your hands back, your fingers towards your knees. So we're also getting into the fascia of the wrists and hands. So you can kind of lean towards your feet and towards your hands, and you'll notice different degrees of intensity, and you can move, but I really encourage you to breathe as you find your shape. And you can kind of see in my body that there's a kind of rocking action here. It's really allowing yourself to move in and out. And that rocking is a very intrinsic movement. It's a listening practice. And because there's often some intensity of sensation in the hands, the wrists, the feet, this is a pretty quick way in to finding your relationship to body and sensation and movement and breath. But we're not in any of these shapes too long, so we'll let that go. Untuck your toes, and if it feels right, kind of lifting one knee and then the other. And you might stay with that single knee lift, or you might come into lifting both knees at the same time. So we're opening into the fronts of your ankles, and you can kind of walk. One knee lifts and the other, just balancing on the ankles. You can use your hands, or you can wrap your hands around your shins and rock a little bit here. And like I said, nothing for too long. We're going to rock right on out. We're going to tuck your toes under and walking back again, this time lifting your knees and a little bounce. A little just bounce, bounce, bounce. Greeting your ankles, your knees, hips. And you might even let this kind of bounce just move through your shoulders and your head. You can let your voice go, right? Let something go. Great practice for that. And our next shape is to take your feet wider. So now out to the edges of the mat. Once again, I'll show this here. Now we're still in a squat, but we have a wider stance and an invitation to slide a little side to side. You can lower one knee and lift the other. And now as we continue to open up through your feet and ankles and knees, you'll also likely sense this in your hips. And let your breath continue to support. So you can always pause. You might find a pocket of sensation, send your breath there. Your practice. And we'll move on from here, I'll invite you to begin to lift your hips. And since we're coming into our first forward fold, you might use your blocks here for support, keeping your knees slightly bent. You might walk your hands out forward, or you might choose to bring pinkies to elbow creases and hang in ragdoll. And in this shape, you can sway a little side to side. You can nod your head yes and shake it no and let your voice go. And then releasing your hands, planting hands, and an invitation to step back to a downward facing dog. And we'll kind of walk out our dog here. So it's not so much a static hold practice, as you can tell thus far. We're going into lots of foundations for these exploratory movements. And as you walk out the dog, bending one knee and then the other, really rolling across the bones of the feet and the ankles, noticing how this translates into knees and hips. Letting your breath support the shape and the movement. And then from here, an invitation to bend both knees as you bring your hips from side to side. And we're bending into the knees. We're moving hips towards your heels. You might inhale up and exhale down, a little more rhythmic here. And one more each side. And coming back to center. This time, the invitation is to bend both knees, maybe alternate lifting one leg and rebend, and the other leg and rebend. And you'll likely notice an increase of intensity in muscular action and respiratory, right? Your breathing and your heart rate rising, all rising to meet this shape, this movement. Sensing your aliveness from the ground up. And then when you're even on both sides, let's lower the knees, maybe widen the knees to the edges of your mat and press back for a child's pose. A moment for rest and recovery and noticing. Receiving the feedback from your body, your heartbeat, your breath, maybe the change in temperature, and really sensing yourself in space, recollecting yourself on the mat. And we'll return to rest again, but for now, the invitation is to come back up through tabletop. And from tabletop to press back into downward facing dog. And like we did a moment ago, this time I'll invite you to lift your right leg up and exhale, gaze forward, step forward into a lunge, and blocks are handy here. So just a few breaths here in your lunge, maybe back knee is down to begin, and we'll lean forward and you can come back, greeting your hip flexor on the left side and your hamstring on the right. One more like that, your rhythm. And now the invitation is to take your left knee off the floor And as we press back this time, you can step your left foot in, you can angle the toes out, and we'll find your way into a pyramid shape. But even this shape becomes the stable base for some exploratory movement, particularly here, finding your way into your spine. And maybe with the support of the blocks, lifting away from your front leg and folding in. Sending your breath right into sensation, greeting your edge and then backing away. This practice is from the ground up, really feeling that connection to earth as you lengthen through your spine. And then from here, I'll invite you to re-lengthen your stance using your block under your right hand, and we'll lengthen through both legs into a pyramid or a triangle shape from the ground up once again. So you can find that connection to earth. You can even greet it once again, taking left hand down and then rolling back up. Let's do that again. Connecting to earth and lifting up from there. Maybe lifting left arm overhead, reaching overhead, finding that side body, reaching with your left fingertips up, maybe even back. And then eventually we'll turn back towards the earth and listen carefully here. Of bending into both knees, really feeling that fluidity. I'm going to invite you to use your blocks for this transition as we lengthen up into your left leg, your right leg, as your left leg lifts off the floor. So now we're in a halfway lift. Again, we've got this connection to earth between your right leg and your hands, which might be on blocks, or you might find your hands to the earth. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's an option to play here from that connection to earth. And I'll give a few options, with or without your blocks. You might bend into right knee, take left knee behind, curl everything into a tight ball, and then lengthen, reach, stretch, and curl it all in. And another option for those of you that want to play into handstand is to press your hands into the earth, curl it all in, and as you lengthen, take both feet off the earth. Curling it in, pressing into hands, maybe lift. And one more time, curl it in, and no need to handstand here. There's plenty to do with 2 feet even on the earth. So we'll all meet there, 2 feet to the earth for a moment, finding a halfway lift with or without blocks. Exhale, folding in and planting hands, stepping back, downward facing dog. Coming to the knees on the earth, wide knees, child's pose. Settling in, arriving, and receiving. Noticing how your breath begins to settle, how your heartbeat begins to slow back down. So we rise to meet the challenge, whatever your chosen challenge is. And then we integrate. We return. So yes, we have a second side to go. Invitation is to come up through tabletop. Pressing back, downward facing dog. Bending both knees, lifting left leg this time. And exhale as you gaze forward, step forward between your hands, and maybe your blocks come in handy once again. Lowering right knee, pressing back, finding your range of motion, in and out, hamstring and hip flexor, So this is a playful flow and an invitation to embrace movement, mobility as a befriending process, something that can awaken you and connect you to a very central part of your own being. This time we'll curl right toes under, and the invitation is to press back. And now maybe stepping your right foot closer, shortening your stance, lengthening through your upper body, and perhaps folding in. And finding your own range of motion here. So we're lengthening into the spine and curling in. And then eventually, let's really find that nice stable base to send your right foot further back. And you can use that block on any setting underneath your left hand as we roll from the earth up into triangle. And you might find that transition again, greeting the earth and rolling your way up. And you can micro bend through your left knee so we're not, locking out the joints. And then maybe once you lift up, you can explore some movement with your right arm. Lifting, reaching overhead, maybe reaching behind. Finding the edge of sensation, that feeling of stretch, and then backing away into a place of ease. Eventually turning your torso, your gaze back down, squaring your hips, right heel can lift again, and then preparing for our launch, right? So you can bend into both knees in preparation. You can bring your blocks with you and lifting up, one leg lift, right? One leg on the floor, great place to stay. You can use your blocks, or you might curl in, finding this little Jiva squat here, curling everything into a tight ball with or without your blocks. We can re-extend here. And if you played with this on the other side, and if it feels good, maybe pressing into hands and lifting, left foot off the earth, right? There's no better or worse or right or wrong practice. You get to play. Right? And if you hang up there a little bit, great. And if you don't go upside down at all is well. Eventually, 2 feet to the earth. Inhale, halfway lift, lifting away from the ground. And then settling into the earth once again, head heavy. Planting your hands, stepping back. Downward facing dog. Knees to earth, wide-legged child's pose. Rest, receive, and integrate. You are welcome to stay in that resting shape longer, or to find any other integrative resting shape that supports you here. When you feel ready, I'll invite you to come back to some basic seated shape and just notice. Notice what arises for you after a short but active practice. What has changed? What's awakened? What sensations are present for you now? And knowing that we can create pretty significant shifts in our state of mind as we create changes in our state of being in your body. So, if this practice was a little too active for you, know that there's a whole range of practices out there. And if it felt like just the right zone, come back to it and play again. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time on the mat. Thanks for being here.